You've said that the most important part of building growth is nailing down your customer, your ICP. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I've definitely seen that if you don't have clarity on who your best customers are and who you're going after, it really causes a lot of spin from a marketing, sales, and product perspective. So if you try to be everything for everyone in particular, you'll likely fail just about everyone. I found that this is especially important for horizontal products. So I've worked at Mailchimp and Mural where there's so many different types of customers and use cases, especially at Mural. I mean, the possibilities are essentially endless. And so with different types of customers, use cases, segments, industries, you need clarity and you need alignment on the organization so that you're all working in the same direction. And both Mailchimp and Mural, we did many iterations of research and analysis to really nail this. And it was a huge evolution. And I really underestimated at the time just how hard it would be to get people bought into the specific customer profiles. I think people actually have a lot of underlying assumptions and even bias about who those customers should be.
You've also written that the hard part is finding the right problem to solve, which is what you worked on both at Mailchimp and Mural.
Yeah, I think getting the problem and the profiles either at the company level, if you're talking like real B2B, or in the SMB world, it actually feels like it operates a little bit more like B2C in that it's probably an individual a founder, or one or two person kind of team. So understanding not only characteristics of that person or company, but what are those specific use cases? What are the jobs to be done? How do you really narrow that down and see specific similarities across groups and where they're truly different? At Mural, a great example of this is we've seen explosive growth since 2020 when the world just all of a sudden tried to figure out how to collaborate in a remote environment. And this meant that users and businesses of like all shapes and sizes, they just flocked to Mural to solve an immediate pain point. And with that much inbound demand, the company didn't even really need to sell. It was just like literally taking orders at the time. But now we're transitioning into sort of the leveling out of pandemic demand, the shift to the macroeconomic winds. And now it's becoming more important than ever that we be really clear about whose problems we're trying to solve and what those problems are. And then who are we building for? So making really clear decisions around what we are, and even more importantly, what we're not building and who we're selling to. So, as part of that, the past 2 years, we've gone through several iterations of our focus target audiences. That could include company vertical or team and role. But I think what it really lacked in the past, and this is sort of I think the most important advice, is that the adoption didn't stick. And I think it didn't stick because we didn't have the right data and research to really back up the choices. And we were also missing kind of important elements of the profile that made it easier to actually execute on. So an example of that uh, might be more along the lines of characteristics don't fall into like just your typical vertical or team or role. It could be something like how you view collaboration. Like, do you feel confident in collaboration and you embrace it, or are you somebody who actually dreads being synchronous with somebody? So for us, at the end of last year, we actually kicked off a project with a third party to do this entire analysis on the ideal customer profile. And I feel like we landed in a really good spot that has teed us up actually for this year.
And how did you decide then whom to exclude, or like what the strategic trade-offs? How did you come to these decisions?
Yeah, so there's qualitative and quantitative components. From a modeling perspective, I want to say we did like 50 different models. It was a very rigorous quantitative exercise, but then you have to also sort of think about how do you execute on this? Can we own this specific space? And the quantitative modeling basically told us where we win. So how do we actually win and with what specific types of customers? And we gut checked that against what we thought the market opportunity was, and just in general, what kind of plays we felt like we had in that space. What are other things that we know? For example, is that a type of company that's going to have money to spend right now? If the answer is no, then maybe that doesn't become a priority focus and another does. A good example of this is weighing product design and engineering teams. Highly competitive market, but definitely the types of teams that continue to get funding, whereas maybe an HR team or a learning team during more difficult economic times are likely to get less funding for technology potentially than a product design and engineering team. So those are some of the types of things that we definitely chatted through.
Well, tell me more about building these quant and qual growth models. How do you do that? What do these models really tell you? What questions do you answer with those models?
Yeah, so a bit differently to the ideal customer profile, one of the things that at every new company that I've joined working on product led growth in particular is to build out this quant and qual growth models to really understand how your business grows. And sometimes I think you take for granted that everybody's aligned on how the business grows. I challenge everybody to go out and actually ask a bunch of leaders in your company how the company grows and see if you get different answers, and I found that you often do. And so, one, this provides really alignment in the company, but more importantly, especially the quantitative version of the model, it has really helped me to assess impact, to understand, where to select specific focus areas. So an example of this is that Mailchimp, everyone in the company felt like we needed to focus on feature usage and that we were launching all these new features in the product and that was the key to really just like driving retention. Though we didn't even say retention, we just said like get more feature adoption. And it became super clear that after we did this financial modeling, this growth modeling, we actually really needed to focus on activation. And that we found that for every, I'll just say X% in activation, that was worth $1 million in revenue. That was really powerful for prioritization. It was powerful for leadership and really a motivating narrative for the team.
You also mentioned that in 2020 growth blew up, everybody went remote, everybody needed remote collaboration, and but Mural was not the only game in town that jumped at this opportunity. So how do you think about finding defensible differentiation?
Yeah, I think you I think you can't just compete on product features. I think we're all learning that it's pretty easy to copy the majority of that piece. And so finding something or some things that are truly defensible and differentiated is really key. So at Mailchimp, for example, it was all about the brand, and Mailchimp's brand was just beloved by its community. And so by creating that connection to the brand, that really stood out from the competition. They also invested in their service partner community. So really partnering with folks that work in agencies and things like that as like being advocates of the product and the brand. For Mural in particular that you're asking about, it was not just about being another whiteboard. There's so many solutions on the market for digital whiteboards, and that's great because there's obviously recognition that that's a very useful solution. But with Mural, we've really been differentiating on this idea that it's not just where you collaborate, but how you collaborate and teaching more of the methodology. So we actually acquired a company called Luma Institute within the past year, and Luma specializes on all of the methodologies and trainings and learnings. And so, as part of that, we're really trying to bring the intelligence, the collaborative intelligence piece, to market with the actual solution of the tool itself.
I guess everybody asks you, so how are you different from Miro? So how have you guys figured out how you're differentiating from your, I guess, biggest competitor?
Yeah, I think one of the key areas that Mural has really excelled at is solving for the enterprise. So Miro's done a fantastic job with PLG, building from the ground up and capturing, SMB and individuals and taking that approach. I think Mural has taken the opposite approach, which is to be sales led from the beginning and really capturing a large part of many, major and strategic enterprise customers, and spreading virality and growth through that. One key way that we've really excelled in the enterprise, especially in certain industries like FinServ, FinTech, government, is being really good and differentiated in our security and privacy features and functionality, and working on things like FedRAMP certification and all the stuff that you really need to meet the needs of like a large enterprise as it pertains to permissioning and making and compliance, really. So that's been an area in particular that I think we've done quite well, and been able to give IT leaders in particular the confidence to roll out and have Mural be across their organizations.
At the time of recording this chat, the CEO website says, "Make it a mural, not just a whiteboard." Is that like like Loom is doing? Oh, hey, send a Loom, um, trying to make it a thing.
Yeah, I think we're doing a lot of copy testing, which I'm sure you would appreciate as part of the work that you do. So we've been experimenting with a bunch of different headlines and messages. I think we're definitely in the point of evolution on how we really find that right positioning of, is it about specifically synchronous collaboration? Is it any type of collaboration, which could be async or synchronous? Is it, yes, the mural just the place where you're collaborating, or is it so much more, especially as we're integrating Luma and still figuring out exactly how that all comes together inside our product and even through the services we sell. What does it mean to be a mural? It could be way beyond what we're thinking today as just like a canvas for brainstorming or retros or ideation and things like that. So, long story short, experimenting.
Hmm. For a product-led tool, onboarding is really important. How are you guys tackling that?
Yeah, at every company I've worked for in this capacity, the first thing I realized is that it's really easy to underestimate the importance of onboarding and activation, but they're so important to not only, getting customers and companies started, but super tied to monetization and long-term retention. And I think the thing that people don't really talk about it enough is that they're actually really hard to nail. I think it's really easy for anyone to do a tear down and say, "Oh, this is crappy, this is hard to do," or just, create this easy guide. But building great and easy onboarding is actually quite difficult. And I think there's a lot of reasons behind that. I think really understanding who you're providing onboarding for. So going back to sort of my first point about ideal customer profile and really understanding the needs and the types of customers. I know one mistake that we've made is trying to kind of be everything to everyone in terms of one size fits all onboarding. So doing a much better job with personalization, or just really even contextualization, I would say at that point in time, is key. And then there's so many great ideas from companies out there, and I think it's tempting to try to copy, "Oh, this worked really well with this company." And I mean, the amount of times that I see executives pull onboarding from like a comparative company, or like, "This must be great because this company is great." And knowing that I've worked at some of those great companies, and what appears to maybe be great isn't necessarily great. So doing the due diligence for yourself to understand what your customers really want and need, and just do so much experimentation to figure out and research where the problems exist, how you can help guide. At Mural in particular, we worked on onboarding for the past year, and we realized a couple of things. One, we actually needed to revisit our definitions of activation. So we originally were thinking about it at a user level, and that was great, but we were missing the relationship of teams and companies. And so we actually recently created a workspace level definition instead of just a member level definition. So, for example, the member level definition was like, have a collaborative session in your first 7 days. But that was just one person. And in order to have a collaborative session, you need to invite someone else, you need to create content. And really, the aha of the product is that multi person, a team experiencing the value together. And the other thing we realized is that we needed to focus on aspects outside of just how personalizing based on like your team and role. So, or how to use the tool. Like it's very easy to fall into the let's just remove friction. I love the equation conversion equals desire minus friction. I think it's really easy to focus on the friction, but actually focusing in on the desire element is often missed and can be extremely valuable in working on onboarding. So what this means right now for us is thinking about, different types of roles that are onboarding and different motivations. So, for example, if I'm the first person who signs up for Mural, we call you a workspace creator. So you're creating the very first workspace. Your motivation is pretty high. You chose the product, you're setting up a workspace, you're probably creating content and inviting someone. But if I'm the person who's being invited, we'll call you the participant. I may be just like, hey, why did Pep invited me to this thing? Like, okay, I'm here, but my intentions are different, my role's different, my motivation's different. So how do we provide an experience that onboards you to what you need to do to participate, but then ultimately turn you into somebody who understands that Mural could be used for your own specific use cases, right? And you become a content creator.
So how do you facilitate that?
Yeah, we're in the process of running a whole bunch of experiments. The most recent one was interesting. We did a painted door test, which I love because you don't really build anything and you test the concept and don't invest a bunch until you understand if there's demand. So we did this idea that in a lot of collaborative sessions, you might have someone who plays the role of facilitator. So they're kind of the person that's created the content, organizing the session, and inviting people in. And for them, we hear a lot through research that it's really clunky if they have people who like can't figure out how to participate, or that it's hard for them to join and participate. And so what we've done is the experiment was all about facilitator triggered onboarding. So actually allowing the facilitator themselves to say, hey, I'm inviting these participants, like I want to trigger onboarding for these folks, so I make sure that when they show up to my session, they know how to add a sticky note or how to add content or something like that. And so the painted door test was basically just seeing, would facilitators want that feature? Is that something that they would do? And we found that there was demand for it. It wasn't like overwhelmingly astounding. Yes, every facilitator would be interested, but it was definitely enough for us to continue down a next variation of what does that look like in terms of that onboarding? Is it customized? Is it just our out of the box onboarding? That type of thing.
Let's talk about teams. At Mailchimp, you had to build a growth practice and a growth team from the ground up. What have you learned about that?
Yeah. So I started out in marketing when I joined Mailchimp, and it was a role that didn't have a team. It had sort of an ambiguous charter around what we were calling, I think it was like marketing optimization. And the whole beginning of the journey was figuring out, well, what problems are we actually really trying to solve as an organization? Like, what are the gaps? And that led me to a really specific gap, which was one, actually just building a practice of experimentation in the company first. And then two, actually building out a product led growth practice. The company was actually really PLG without intentionally being PLG, for lack of better words. And so what I learned was, one, to really lean into what you already have. So when I mean what you already have, it's like access to the resources you have, or maybe the surface areas that people are willing to, give up or allow you to kind of experiment with, and worry less about sort of what the precise or perfect approach is, and go with where you have sort of tailwinds. So in that example, rather than try to just go all in and say, okay, we need to build this product led growth practice and here's exactly how we do it, I had opportunity to hire some folks in marketing and use the website and email for experimentation. And I really tailored our work to what I thought would be really high visibility and get leadership's attention so that we could build the business case. And honestly, it happened faster than I actually anticipated. Within less than a year time period, we were able to drive some really big impact. And honestly, it was just because there was so much low hanging fruit in the business. And that was the catalyst for, okay, like let's give this a shot. So it's all about working with what you have to build the case that makes it really easy to say, yeah, this is a thing I want to do. And so then what it ended up happening was I actually took my team that was in marketing and moved over and combined with an existing product team that had been really failing at their mission of, because they were taking a very traditional product approach instead of a growth approach. So that team was responsible for, the project was like revamp the dashboard, which is like absolutely the wrong way to think about what we actually were trying to accomplish, which is continuous onboarding. Like, how do you continuously help somebody understand what you can do in Mailchimp? What are the different features? How do you level up your marketing efforts inside Mailchimp? And so it was like the perfect spot to say, here's a problem set. Let's try doing this a different way. And if we try doing this a different way, I guarantee you we'll actually have much more measurable outcomes and focus. And so that meant, definitely evangelizing and teaching an existing product team on how to operate as a PLG practice versus like a core product team. Some of that meant breaking existing processes, bringing in new tools, switching some people out who just weren't a good fit for growth, hiring some new talent, and really a ton of communication out into the organization about what we were doing and what we were learning to get people sort of on the along the journey with us.
At Mural, when you joined, there already was a growth team that you scaled. You scaled the team to 4 teams. What have you learned about scaling growth teams?
Yeah, so when I joined Mural, there were, I think, two product managers, a designer, and a couple of engineers. And so they were working really broadly on all different growth problems. And so one of the biggest things to do first, as I mentioned, was sort of revisit and really refine our quantitative and qualitative growth model to figure out what are the focus areas. And I bring that up because I often use that as a way to build out which teams we should have and how, what type of background do we need in terms of the team and how do we organize. So at Mural specifically, we had opportunity within activation. And so ultimately, we ended up building teams that set up really as stages of the customer journey. So, and the reason why I'm not necessarily giving names of the teams is over 2 years, I think we've changed teams like 5 times. And that just sort of shows you the importance of the resilience piece in a growing company, because as staffing changes have been a thing, the last year or so, or changes to our business strategy, it's really important that your organization is nimble to that. So what that's meant was hiring other growth product managers. In particular, one of the first hires that I always make is analytics. I think that insights are the lifeblood of any growth practice. And so actually my very first hire at Mural was a seasoned, really business oriented product analyst, and built out that team to really support, one, the building of the quantitative model, but two, just all the reporting and insights that are necessary to really run a strong product growth practice. And then from there, I started to hire more of the growth product managers, and we built out with designers and engineers and such.
You told me that a key aspect of hiring and cultivating a growth team is cultivating curiosity. Uh, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I think I look for curiosity when I interview, and then I definitely try to encourage that as part of our team culture. And so it would be a really good debate to say, do we think curiosity is innate or if it's something that can be learned? I think it's probably a little bit of both. So during the interview process, I look for people who want to know why. They've asked those questions. And you can often tell through somebody's explanation of a specific project whether they really actually care about the outcome, or how interested they were in the problems that they were solving, just by the types of questions that they were specifically asking. And it's a lot of probing, I'd say, during the interview process to kind of get a sense of that. And so I look for that first and foremost during interviewing. And then once as a team, from a culture perspective, one, we really try to just write that into our charter as a team. Like, we are curious by nature. And what does that mean? It means asking a lot of good questions. It means challenging the status quo. And really the biggest way that I do this is honestly to lead by example. I'm insatiably curious. I ask so many questions. I love to dig into data and research myself, and I actively try to encourage and praise those that demonstrate that on a regular basis, and subtly, like, wow, that's an awesome question, like, I can't wait to learn more, and find ways as a team to see that as a really positive part of the work that we do.